or good afternoon, as the case may be. Nice to see you all. Okay, it's ECM and it's Friday. Yeah, you all know what that means. I'm kind of hoping it's not going to be a crazy day today, to be honest, but we'll see what happens. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 27th of October, 2020. I'm like rearranging myself so I don't look like I'm wearing my plant as a hat. I'm coming to you as always from occupied Tongva land here in Southern California. For our visually challenged viewers, today I have my hair slicked way back. I'm doing like a Sophia Richie kind of thing. Those of you who are up with what the kids are paying attention to right now will understand what that means. I am wearing a V-necked black sweater this morning. I have my really thick gold hoops in. I am a pink-skinned, dirty blonde, green-eyed woman, and my pronouns are she, her. Somebody commented that they really like knowing what was in the background as a visually impaired viewer, so I will just mention that I have this huge green leafy plant behind my right ear. At least I think that's how that looks online. I have a lamp behind my left one and a big cushy chair on my bookshelf behind me. Nice to see you all this morning. Alabama, Benicia, California, Puyallup. See, I always have such fun pronouncing that because, I've driven through the reservation in Washington State. Hi, Nova Scotia, Limerick, Pennsylvania, Maine. I hope you're hanging in there. Still on lockdown. Shout out to our friends in Maine. Hello, Hamilton, Ontario, Canton, Georgia, Providence, Rhode Island. We got people from all over the place today. Please don't forget to hit the like button on this broadcast. And we got a lot to cover today because there's just a lot of state level things going on right now. We don't often have a lot of time to talk about state level stuff. And today, while we've got definitely things on the national level to discuss, I also just want to touch on a couple things at the state level. But let's do the big stuff first. Ivanka has been ordered to testify against her dad. And many of you know that I take a particular degree of glee and schadenfreude in this, given the fact that I used to know Ivanka back before she became a fascist. And this one is particularly sweet in my mouth. So for those who are not aware, in the $250 million fraud case that is currently being litigated at trial in New York State, Ivanka was originally one of the named defendants. However, that was dismissed on appeal due to the statute of limitations. And that relates to the lack of tolling of her claims, unlike those against her brothers, who still remain named defendants, Don Jr. and Eric. One of the things that has happened here is that nonetheless, Tish James has subpoenaed Ivanka Trump to testify against her dad. And one of the things that is particularly juicy about this, as I mentioned on the broadcast, I think last week when this issue first was kind of starting to make news and we knew that Engoron was going to have to rule on it, is that there are allegations that the apartment that she owned in Trump Tower, or rather she was renting in Trump Tower, was offered to her at a price point of $8 million, but was valued on the books that Donald Trump was using to obtain insurance and get bank loans and such as at more than $20 million. And that's leaving aside her role, notwithstanding the fact that she can't be a defendant because of the statute of limitations. That's leaving aside her role in managing financial statements as a part of her role inside the Trump organization. She was a vice president of the Trump organization up until 2016. So all of this is very bad news if you're Ivanka Trump, notwithstanding the fact that she's not facing criminal liability, because she's now going to have to choose between perjuring herself, which would arguably open her up to additional criminal liability, or testifying truthfully against her dad. The vise continues to tighten around all of these folks. Okay, so we're going to have to see how this plays out. Now, I want everybody to know this testimony is not happening today. Engoron has given, after he heard oral argument this morning and then he ruled at around 10:35 Eastern time, he has said that she cannot be called as a witness until November 1st, so middle of next week. The reason why he's doing that is because he wants to give her a window to appeal. I'm just going to tell you all, as with most things at the trial court level, there's an extraordinary amount of discretion granted to trial court judges about who's allowed to testify and who isn't, and who's has a viable subpoena and who doesn't. And I don't expect that this is going to be overturned on appeal. She doesn't have a claim on statute of limitations for testimony. I mean, and that's the whole reason why this doesn't make any sense. So she was trying to avoid essentially being put in the position that I just described, where either she's got to perjure herself and open herself up to criminal liability, or where she has to testify truthfully against her father. That's really what's going on there. So that's a little bit of fascinating news. And I would expect that if she doesn't appeal, we're going to see her on the stand next week. That's going to be one to watch. All right. Let's talk about something else that hit the news this morning that I just want to clarify for everyone, because this was like, I think it hit everybody's phones through a bunch of push notifications without any context. So Biden is not going to be on the primary ballot in New Hampshire. And neither, by the way, is any other Democratic candidate. So I want people to understand what's happening here, all right? As those of you who have been here for a long time know, and those of you who've been following this for a long time know, the DNC is rearranging the primary schedule in 2024 to de-emphasize states that are like overwhelmingly white, that were front-loaded at the beginning of the primary schedule, and to allow states that have a representation that looks a lot more like the Democratic Party to go earlier in the process. So South Carolina is now going to be the official first primary. However, New Hampshire is pissed about this because they're used to being first, all right? And so they're going to hold a primary outside of that schedule, and the DNC has recommended as a result, and they have this whole like policy and rules provisions inside the DNC. They have basically instructed every Democratic candidate to stay off the ballot in New Hampshire as a result. I'm just going to say I think New Hampshire is being like exceedingly high school about this. There are very good reasons to rearrange the primary ballot schedule. I mean, honestly, like it just doesn't make any sense to have a tiny state that is overwhelmingly white go first. It makes much more sense to have South Carolina, which is far more representative and diverse, to be first in line, because it gives you a better indication of how the field of the Democrats in general is going to go. And so one of the things they're really trying to do here is to like avoid what happened in 2020, where Biden came in fifth, right? And, you know, I have to say that I think that it makes a lot of sense. Like I have for a very long time wanted states that had much more significant representation of Black and brown voters to go earlier in the process. Because otherwise there starts to be this thing of like, oh, that person really isn't doing well, so maybe I shouldn't vote for them in the primary, right? It just doesn't make any sense. And so that's what's going on there. Nobody should panic about it. You know, it's not going to be a situation that's going to adversely impact the presidential run or anything like that. And that's the reason why. All right. So that's that story. All right. One other thing on the national level, in terms of national news, again, I got to remind everybody, Trump has now been sanctioned twice by Judge Engoron for violating the gag order. Those fees, people had asked me yesterday, and I meant to address this, how those fees have to be paid. So the judge ordered them to be paid into a New York State fund that goes to support people who need legal services. All right. So it doesn't go to the judge, and it doesn't go to the court, and it doesn't go into the judicial system. It goes straight to this fund that is designed to help people who can't afford legal services to get them. That's, and this is not surprising. Ordinarily, when you're fined by a court for doing something wrong, it goes to some form of a legal services organization. Alina Habba, Donald Trump's lawyer, has paid those fines out of her bank account, her client, presumably her client fund, but I'm not going to ask that question, this morning as his attorney. So he has paid $15,000 in fines now. And again, I got to remind you, we have this looming decision about extending that. You can go back and watch yesterday's broadcast if you want the details, but we have this looming decision in Judge Chutkan's courtroom about not just reinstating and taking off the temporary administrative stay, Trump's gag order in that court, but also modifying his bail conditions. So he is subject to a federal statute. Again, go watch this yesterday, that allows for his fundamentally like immediate arrest upon motion of the government that he's violated the gag order there. So very big things happening in the context of trying to limit Trump's ability to speak out of turn outside of a courtroom and intimidate witnesses, threaten judges and prosecutors, interfering with the jury pool, all this sort of stuff. So, oh, my bad. Thank you, Catherine, for the correction here. It's going to the Lawyers Fund for Client Protection, which my recollection, okay, fair enough. It reimburses clients for dishonest attorneys for misappropriated client funds. Fair enough. My understanding, and again, like you guys, I'm not perfect here. My understanding is that it had been going to a lawyer's fund, because I've seen fines like this in cases that I've been involved in New York State, that was going to support financial services for people who can't afford it. So thank you for the correction. Appreciate it. In any event, it does go to a good place. And that's the question really I think that people were asking is like, does it just get dumped into some random court fund? No, it does not. So one of the things that I want people to also understand here is that we have this looming situation where there is likely to be an additional way in which Trump can be sanctioned for violating the gag order. So I want everyone to just be aware that this issue is very much alive, and we're not in a situation here where going forward, he's going to be able to get away with this stuff much longer. I think everybody who's looking at this knows that whether it's DC, because I do think there's going to be a ruling again on this temporary administrative stay as early as next week. The reply brief is due this weekend. There's a very strong chance that those bail conditions are going to be extended, and we're going to see this stuff kind of, again, start to like close in on him much more tightly in very short order. Okay. Why would Jack Smith be withdrawing subpoenas? So I touched on this a couple of days ago, or it might have been yesterday, that there's lots of reasons to withdraw a subpoena. And again, this is something where I don't want anybody to be concerned. Okay. It could be that he issued a subpoena and there's been an agreement reached with the party who was subpoenaed to provide what he was looking for. Okay. It could be that he doesn't any longer need the evidence. It could be that there's, like another reason to withdraw the subpoena, like, it was improperly issued, right? Like there's all sorts of reasons why subpoenas can be withdrawn. Again, it's not anything that should make people worry. It doesn't mean his case is falling apart. It doesn't mean that, there's something wrong behind the scenes. There's lots of reasons why a subpoena can be withdrawn. And again, like nobody should panic. And again, yeah, Jen, that's the other point. He could have gotten the evidence he needed another way. So all of this is something that I really want people to kind of, again, you got to like regulate your central nervous systems. Not everything is a reason to panic. Okay. All right. What else? George Santos was arraigned again this morning on this superseding indictment, this time concerning his theft of, I just, again, I have these moments where I just have to laugh. This one is related to his theft of identity. Essentially, it's identity theft of some people who had donated to his campaign, credit card fraud. He is, he's out. There is no bail in the federal system. So it's not like he had to post bail on this or anything else. His trial date has been set for September of 2024. So we will see him tried just in advance of his potential reelection. But I'm going to just mention he may not be in Congress by then. So many of you have asked me about this motion to expel him from Congress that was initiated by the other New York House Republicans this week. And so that motion is going forward. The indications are they have the votes. And so he may very well be expelled from Congress when that vote comes up. Now, as of this morning, it's unclear when that vote is going to take place. Again, I have to remind everybody that the fact that this is being initiated by Republican House members out of New York State is not an indication that they've had some kind of like come to Jesus moment. All right. In fact, from a strategic standpoint, the greater likelihood here is that they see the possibility that his continued presence in the House is going to drag down the entire New York GOP caucus. All right. So they're doing it to kind of save their own asses. However, I will mention that our new Speaker of the House has said that he is not going to do anything to block this vote. And so I think that, whenever they decide to bring it to the floor, again, we have like a fairly robust House GOP caucus here. If they're willing to stand with the Democrats to move forward his expulsion, he's probably going to be gone. So there we go. We're going to have to see how this plays out. All right. Okay. So let's see what else. I have to mention a couple of state-related issues this morning that I want people to be aware of. First of all, shout out to one of our longtime Patreon subscribers who I always love when this happens because it's the fun thing about being on this side of things. It was literally like, I am a long time Patreon subscriber, first-time question asker, which is always good to know. So thank you for being here for all these years, and feel free to ask a question whenever you would care to. The question was about actually, it wasn't even really a question. It was a request to draw attention to the fact that there is a very significant Pennsylvania Supreme Court race underway right now that people should be aware of. Dan McCaffrey is in a very tight race with a Republican for a Supreme Court seat in Pennsylvania. I'm going to remind everybody, Pennsylvania is a swing state. Yes, Josh Shapiro is currently the governor, but we do not want to end up in a situation where arguably a challenge to the 2024 election that runs through Pennsylvania ends up in front of a Pennsylvania Supreme Court that is not Democratic. All right. So this is a really, really big one. And I want people to kind of be aware that it's out there. And I want to thank our viewer for kind of bringing this to my attention. Also, early voting has started in North Carolina. Again, I got to remind everybody there are off-year races happening all the time right now. So please make sure that you are paying attention to what's happening where you live, paying attention to voting on ballot initiatives and the like. Make sure that you're paying attention to local and state races. Again, all this stuff really matters a lot right now because so much of voter suppression, abortion rights, gun control legislation, all this anti-trans stuff that is so horrendous is happening at the state level. So please pay very, very, very close attention to what's happening where you live. All right. Okay. Oh my goodness. All right. Okay. I'm going to touch on something really quickly here with regard to Marjorie Taylor Greene, because I got a last minute question from Amy Apolloди. Hi, Amy. Old friend of mine. We've known each other I think 25 years now, about the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene has filed a motion in Congress claiming that Rashida Tlaib engaged in insurrection. So let me just give you all the background on this, because this is again, a situation where the hypocrisy is just neck deep. And also I want people to understand what the allegations are here. All right. Because we are at a moment of extremely heightened anti-Semitism and Islamophobia simultaneously. All right. And one of the things that's happening here is that there's been a lot of right-wing reporting that is claiming all sorts of things about Rashida Tlaib that aren't true. Okay, so Rashida Tlaib engaged in a protest, and she, I have to remind everybody, she was a community organizer before she got elected to Congress. All right, she was involved in a protest in one of the congressional buildings this week, calling for a ceasefire, not supporting Hamas, not claiming that terrorism against Israeli citizens is legitimate, calling for a ceasefire, which, by the way, AOC has done also. And lots of people on both sides of this conflict have asked for humanitarian reasons. All right. The protest was loud. All right. But you know what? There was no attempt to overthrow the federal government. There was no attempt to kind of block the confirmation of an election. There was no effort to kind of claim that, Joe Biden wasn't duly elected. No windows were smashed. Nobody smeared their feces all over the inside of the building. It wasn't organized at the highest levels by Rashida Tlaib. She was just sitting there doing it. It was a legitimate form of protest. And you do not, by the way, abdicate your First Amendment right to protest when you become an elected member of Congress. All right. So everybody really needs to see this for what it is. All right. It's really, really critical that we understand that. First of all, it's a distraction from the fact that we now have an insurrectionist as the Speaker of the House, and the fact that the insurrectionists who are in the House right now have not been called to account. But also, it's a complete misstatement of what actually happened inside the congressional building when Rashida Tlaib participated in this protest. And, I got to remind everybody, there are people on every side of the fence, people of every background, people of every religion right now calling for a ceasefire so that humanitarian aid can be provided to Gaza. And it's not a radical position. It's not outrageous. It's actually quite legitimate. All you have to do is go look at some of the footage about children who are having amputations on the floor of hospitals inside Gaza right now without sedation to understand the need for a ceasefire so humanitarian aid can be delivered. Okay, so I want to just mention one other thing here, and then we're going to kind of talk about like a funding related issue. So I was asked to comment on Dean Phillips' primary challenge to Biden. Okay, I just have to tell you all, I think this is possibly the dumbest thing I have ever seen in presidential politics since Sarah Palin. And unfortunately, Steve Schmidt is involved in this effort as well. I have to remind you, Steve Schmidt was the campaign manager for John McCain. He is the person who recommended that Sarah Palin be the vice presidential nominee. And I got to say that when I track back to the origins of how we got here, how we got to this place where, you know, outrage politics and victimhood politics by the GOP, you know, the laced at that time, not exactly overt white supremacy that led to Trump's rise. I tack it straight back to Sarah Palin being the vice presidential candidate that ran with John McCain. And Steve Schmidt is involved in Dean Phillips' run as well. Dean Phillips doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of primarying Joe Biden. I just have to like point this out. It's absolutely like a moot point. But the thing that worries me about it is the prospect of it drawing attention away from Biden's success. It has the potential to undermine Biden's campaign. And the last thing that we need right now is something that like weakens Biden as, you know, a second time candidate. All right. I am concerned, as other people raised on the Patreon feed this morning, about the fact that like we're in a situation right now where the messaging that the DNC has been using on Biden's successes is not landing. Okay. And you know, there are very good reasons for this. Like, I have to say, I think it's very hard to create a soundbite about like the success of the economy post-COVID in a way that actually resonates with people in their everyday lives. Right. I think the jobs numbers are not something that most people really care about. I've said this before. This will not come as a surprise to anyone else. I happen to be someone who kind of tends to think that there are ways that if there was more Gen Z consultation going on inside the DNC, these problems could be easily solved, right? Like all you have to do is look at the way that people like Victor Shi and, you know, Santiago Meyer and Johnny Palmodessa, the way that these Gen Z activists are talking about this stuff, that really lands much more effectively than the DNC is doing it right now. I personally think that messaging is a concern right now. Like I actually am concerned about it as we head toward 2024. But simultaneously, we're seeing some interesting things happen inside the Biden campaign on the front of digital messaging. By the way, if you're not following like Biden-Harris HQ on Threads, that is the war room for the Biden campaign on digital messaging. They're hilarious. And they're also doing some very, very good work right now of amplifying all of these sound bites that the RNC and candidates have handed over in the midst of the absolutely the cluster, I'm not going to swear, that was the race for Speaker of the House, where we literally have like Republican representatives saying that the party isn't fit to lead and that they don't know what they're doing and that everything is a mess and the American people don't want this version of politics. I mean, there's like so many clips of this. And I am happy to see at least that the digital team seems to be stepping up. I'm a little bit more concerned about the messaging inside the DNC. We're going to have to see how this plays out. I got to remind everybody, we're like a year away from the election right now. So it's, you know, a lot of folks, unfortunately, inside the country are not as much in the deep of this as we are. But I do encourage everyone to kind of like, if you're talking to your reps, mention to them that you think that, and they're Democrats, mention to them that you think the Democrats need better messaging, because the more that gets put forward, the more likely it is to reach the top tiers of the campaign in the DNC. All right. Yeah. So just to circle back, the Dean Phillips run is a mess. And I really, I have to say one other thing here, because he's not a third party candidate, but and notwithstanding the fact that RFK Jr. is taking votes away from Trump, in his run as an independent, like they're very worried about it now, notwithstanding that his original run was being funded by people like Harlan Crow. But all that said, I do want people to be very mindful of the fact that when you see people calling out Joe Biden and saying that he's weak, or, we're off the kind of like he's too old thing now, fortunately enough. But, remember that is a strategy that is designed to divide Democrats. And one of the things that's really concerning about this is that when you give people another option and they're falling for the propaganda, which is all right-wing seated, right? They may be looking at Dean Phillips as a reasonable option, even though nobody heard his name until yesterday, right? Like, it's just really not a good idea. So that is what it is. And again, Steve Schmidt has been problematic for a very, very, very long time. His affiliation with the Lincoln Project never changed that. He was booted out of the Lincoln Project for doing things that were honestly like illegal, and that were raising really serious questions with regard to his professionalism and in relation to journalists and what he was disclosing and his ethics. So, no, like Dean Phillips is a hard no, and everybody should know exactly why. All right. I have to mention a couple of things just about the NRA. And, again, I have to point out that this mass shooter is still on the loose. There is still an extraordinary manhunt underway in Maine. Again, I have to shout out all our members in Maine, our followers in Maine, our subscribers, our paid subscribers in Maine, because there's a lot of you. Much love to you. I know these are really scary times. I know that many of you are like just sitting at home with your doors locked. I'm really hoping that there's a resolution of this soon. There's been a lot of discussion about the NRA, predictably, in the last couple of days as a result of this. And I have to remind everybody, like, notwithstanding the fact that the NRA is in free fall right now in terms of their funding, they have routed an enormous amount of money into the pockets of politicians over the last few decades. And somebody asked a question this morning, which is like, how do we de-influence these people? It is a requirement that Citizens United be overturned with legislation. We have to get dark money out of politics. And the NRA is one prime example of that. All right. We cannot do that until we take back the House. And we have the Senate in like, a majority big enough to overcome a filibuster, and until we continue to have a Democratic president. So it's incredibly important that we are focused on all the races in 2024. And, I also just want to mention one thing, because I always like to tell you guys when I'm seeing like a certain version of troll or bot, like a faulty or fraudulent version of a series of accounts showing up on social media. So one of the things that I just want to mention here is that since the mass shootings in Lewiston, there's been a real uptick on threads of accounts that have again, this will sound very familiar to those of you who have been here for a long time when I've talked about like the kinds of bots and trolling that we used to see on Twitter all the time. These are accounts that have an American flag as their profile avatar. And they may have names that are like so-and-so 1776, right? These are people, and they're probably not people, let's just be honest about it, who have taken to trolling folks who are talking about the need for an assault weapons ban, people who are talking about the need for gun safety legislation, folks who are shouting out the representative in Maine who had an A+ rating with the NRA until yesterday, until he announced. And I got to give him credit. Like, I don't knock people. Like, again, I know other people will. All right. But I have to say that I think when somebody has like a revelation that they've been wrong and they step forward and they say, now I'm in favor of an assault weapons ban, I made a mistake, we have an obligation in response to that to be like, thank you. Not to be like, why didn't you do it so far? Right? I mean, like, the guy stood up and said he owns the fact that that he was wrong. All right. So, we have people showing up in response to that kind of an event, or not people, not necessarily folks, but accounts showing up in response to that, saying things like, I just renewed my membership in the NRA because every American needs an AR-15. Look at Israel. Or thanks to Hamas, right? And these are not, again, I have to point out, these are not legitimate accounts, all right? You don't need to engage with accounts that are saying this, right? You can just simply block them. And, if you're curious about it, I encourage you to go look at the profile. But, this is an updated version of the propaganda type of bot activity that we have seen after every mass shooting in this country, every single one, all right? Because those are moments where there is peak demand for a renewed assault weapons ban. And, you know, if you're curious about how the assault weapons ban impacted mass shootings, you can go look at the data, because when we had an assault weapons ban in this country, mass shootings were so far down as compared to where they are since the assault weapons ban was lifted. All right. And there are a lot of people who are, you know, enemies of the United States, frankly, who see mass violence as an opportunity. And the same, by the way, is true, I have to say it, of the far right in this country. They want everyone scared. They want everyone terrified. They want mass violence. They want the ability of people who are lone wolves to carry out shootings. That's what stochastic terrorism is all about, right? We've had a lot of conversations on this broadcast over the last 6 years about the fact that, you know, civil war, quote unquote, because I get this question every once in a while, are we going to be in a civil war? I have to point out to everybody that there's an argument to be made that we have been for a very long time already, because it doesn't look like, you know, people lined up with muskets in the streets in muslin uniforms, right? It looks like lone wolf white supremacist actors being incentivized by people like Donald Trump to go out and commit mass violence against communities. All right. And that is clearly not what happened in Lewiston. This is someone who is even though he liked Donald Trump Jr.'s posts, right? Like, we know from his social media feeds that he was following a number of very far right-wing figures, but he also very clearly has been in a mental health crisis that is quite significant and severe. But I just want to point out that, like, lone wolf violence that is white supremacist affiliated benefits white supremacists, right? It makes people scared in many instances. And there's a lot of concern about this. Mark Elias is out there talking about this right now, as of today. It makes people afraid to go vote in person because of the fear that they're going to be subjected to anti-democratic violence at the polls. So, you know, one of the things that I just really want people to be very, very clear on is that if you see this kind of thing on social media, recognize it for what it is. Don't engage it, block it, okay? Because the chances are that it's not legitimate. And if it even is a real person, it's probably somebody aligned with the far right, all right? You just don't need to engage in it. All right. It's Friday. I have to remind you all, we have 717 people live here right now, by the way, from my count. If you can go smash that like button, you know, if you're on your phone, minimize the chat, smash the like button. It helps for this broadcast to get circulated, and it makes a really big difference to us here behind the scenes. It is Friday, and, you know, I have to say that there's so many moving pieces at the end of this incredibly difficult week. I mean, I just have to acknowledge how difficult the news cycle is right now. I mean, I spent a huge chunk of yesterday's broadcast talking about the importance of all of us managing our mental health and our engagement right now so that we can continue doing the work of moving the needle forward. I really want people to be just very, very careful this weekend about what you engage with. And also, I'm not expecting that the news cycle is going to stop. All right. So to me, I just want to send some love out to our audience and all of our regulars here. You know who you are. It's really important that you take time this weekend, if the news cycle is slow, to make sure that, yeah, I see this person. Uh-oh, I think I just banned the wrong person. Sorry, you guys. I'm gonna get Linda back. Whoops, my bad. I want people to, I'm sorry, Linda, I just blocked one of our absolute regulars. I'm going to bring her back. I will find a way to bring her back. I just want everybody this weekend to take some time as necessary to make sure that you are doing what you need to do to take care of yourselves, and take a break from the news if you need to. And I'm going to remind everybody that it's really, really critical that we operate in a way where we are conscious of how we are being triggered and what our mental health is at any given moment. I got a notification on my phone yesterday that there was a moment a couple of days ago when I was sitting still here at my desk looking at something online where my heart rate jacked to 130, even though I hadn't really moved in 10 minutes. And I know exactly what I was doing at that moment. And it was looking at something and dealing with something that was like very triggering in the news and very stressful. So, you know, again, technology is wild. You know, that my Apple Watch was able to tell me that my heart rate had spiked. But I really want people to be very, very thoughtful about where we're going to be, going forward in terms of the need to do things as we head toward 2024 to preserve democracy, to fight for what's right, to keep the needle moving forward. All right, my friends, I will catch you all here on Monday at the absolute latest. If you are a Patreon subscriber, which I highly encourage you to become, because that's the way that we financially support this work here behind the scenes, for the most part, in addition to merch and ad revenue, which is like almost nothing. I want to encourage everyone to become a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistance-live. Subscriptions start at $2 all the way up to $100 a month. And at every level, you get to ask questions before the broadcast every day. So if you have questions and nobody's answering them, that's how you can get the information that you need. And also, you can join us on Sunday. This is like one of my favorite events of the week, honestly, for Progressive Coffee Hour, which is every Sunday morning for Patreon subscribers only at 8:30 a.m. Pacific and 11:30 Eastern. It's a bunch of great people who come together with like a warm beverage and a lot of love and kind of talk about what's happening and how to make change. So thank you to our 6-year subscribers. I'm so glad you guys like love Sundays. You're all amazing. I'm really grateful for you. All right. So I will see our Patreon folks on Sunday morning. I'll see the rest of you here at regular time on Monday. I want to encourage you to have like a really safe weekend. Shout out to our friends in Maine. You are in my heart. I'm thinking about you every minute. I hope this all comes to an end very soon because it's extremely scary. And I know the devastation and the trauma of what has taken place is going to be with all of you for a very, very, very long time. So just know that like you're in my heart, and this community I know is supporting everybody in Maine. And I'm really, really grateful to all of you for showing that love to our folks in Maine who are regular viewers and subscribers here, because it's really important for us to feel the support. I'll share one quick thing before I go. In the last few days, I mentioned this on Threads last night, I've made a real point of reaching out to old friends, including some people who I haven't talked to in a really long time. Amy Apollodia, I know you're here. I talked to Susanna yesterday, who I hadn't talked to for like, I don't know, a few years at least. And I just want to mention that, one thing I want everybody to remember here is that isolation, and particularly our isolation since the lockdown period of the pandemic, has been ongoing for a lot of us, particularly those of us who are immune compromised, who are still masking with good reason, right? The pandemic's not over. I want to just remind everyone that isolation is one of the things that kind of breeds despair. And it has made such a big difference to me in the last few days, not only to obviously be present in this fantastic community that exists here, but also to be really feeling the give and take of love and support from old friends. And so it's really important that you do that for yourself as well. Make sure that you're managing your own mental health, and make sure that you're managing in a way that creates connection, because isolation is really difficult on all of us. And feeling like we're alone facing down these incredibly traumatic times is really hard. So reach out to those people. Tell them you love them. Ask if you can say hi. It's really, really important. All right. Much love to everyone. And I will catch you all here on Sunday if you're a Patreon subscriber, on Monday if you're not. And I thank you for your viewership no matter what. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you soon. Okay, bye.